Welcome, everybody. I'm Cody Horton, Managing Director for Diverse Recruiting Experts. I'm amazed to have a phenomenal guest with us, Latasha Gillespie, who is the Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Amazon Studio. Latasha has a very busy and productive schedule. So, I'm thankful, Latasha, that you could join us today. And so, a little bit about Latasha, being that she is the Executive Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Amazon Studios, Prime Video, and IMDb. Her role is really to build the mechanisms to improve diversity and inclusion, content, creative, and the ecosystem across Amazon Studios. Latasha's scope is global. You've got a huge role. She travels the world sharing inspirational messages of leadership and inclusion. And based on your 20 years of experience, I couldn't think of anybody better to do that. Prior to this role, Latasha led global diversity and inclusion across Amazon's corporate organization. She's credited with the company's participation in Historically Black Colleges and Universities Partnership Challenge. And she's also credited with leading Amazon's first conversation of race and ethnicity, their core conference. Prior to Amazon, Latasha spent 20 years in finance and human resources at Caterpillar Incorporated. She's had assignments in Treasury and both North America and Latin America dealer organizations. In 2000, Latasha joined the HR team, holding a variety of positions, including diversity recruiting, Six Sigma Black Belt, compensation and benefits manager, and employee relations director, facilities in both the Mexico and the US. And she was also Caterpillar's chief diversity officer for 3 years before she went overseas to be the head of HR for Africa, Middle East, Russia, CIS, and Asia Pacific. She was also Black Enterprise named her as 2019 Most Powerful Women in Corporate Diversity. And she is a 2018 Ebony Magazine Power 100 honoree. Latasha grew up in Chicago. I just left Chicago a few years ago. She received her degree in finance from the Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Latasha also currently resides in Los Angeles with her husband, Damien. They have 2 sons, Damien II, a recent graduate of Howard University, and Miles, who attends Howard University in DC. That's amazing and really impressive. And I'm just thrilled that you took the time to join us, Latasha.
Listen, it's my pleasure to be here. It's interesting, to hear someone read your whole life while you're sitting there listening. So it's funny. The one thing I thought was funny when you said she travels the world, I was like, well, she used to. So she's been grounded for a year, but hopefully we'll get back to normal soon.
That's right. We're not racking up those frequent flyer miles either.
No, but thank God for Delta, because they let my, Delta Diamond extend another year. So I was like, yes.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's amazing how they're doing that. Well, Latasha, I know a lot of people wanted to join this. There are some people who were not able to join it, but they'll get the replay afterwards. Okay. We're also going to take questions in the Q&A box. So put your questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to questions. If we can't get to all the questions, then we'll follow up with you. A lot of things that I've looked at when I was researching your background, Latasha, very amazing and impressive. One of the questions I have for you is, what have you learned on this journey that would help other women who are on the journey toward growing their career?
Yeah, it's funny, and I'm going to start this question off with something that may it may for some people feel a little controversial, but for me, it's just who I am. And I have learned that for me, the most expensive place to be is outside of the will of God. And that's important for me. And I'm not trying to evangelize or convert anyone from their beliefs, but in terms of who I am and what has guided me, I have to say that first and foremost. So my path has been anything but linear, right? So I started off in finance, somehow ended up in HR, became a Six Sigma Black Belt, just a variety of things that you've already gone through. And in each of those situations, I did a couple things. One, I always prayed for the yes or the yuck. God, is this my next right step? And even when it didn't make sense, sometimes I said yes. And when on paper, it looked like I should have said yes, but I knew in my spirit, he was saying, no, that's not for you, I turned down. And so for me, the first thing is making sure that I'm always, in the center of his will in terms of my career path. And so always praying for the yes or the yuck. And then the second thing I think is being open to possibilities and leaning into the yes, right? So, there were times in my career, as you saw, based on my educational background and my work experience, where someone presented an opportunity to me that I didn't always feel necessarily qualified for, right? Or didn't feel like I met all the criteria. And actually what I've learned is those are the things to actually go chase. It's go chase the things outside your comfort zone. Go chase the things that are actually going to make you slightly uncomfortable, the places that are going to stretch you and grow you. Because that's where you're really going to learn. And I would just tell people to do that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you sharing how you actually lean in on your faith to make decisions. In fact, one of the things you talked about is people said, hey, look, careers look like they're linear. And I think more people than not have that misconception that leaders that have succeeded and they're at your level had that straight trajectory. What do you think are some of the missteps or setbacks that you encountered along the way?
And I try not to live with regrets, right? So I feel like everything is a learning opportunity to grow from. But I think back to some of the things, knowing what I know now, how would I have done those differently? So a great example of that is when I went to Singapore. So when I got the Singapore assignment, it was actually a developmental assignment. So what that meant was I was asked to go over and take a job that was actually a level below the job I was currently doing, right? But there's no financial loss, like your grandfather in terms of your money, your finances, your stock options, all that kind of stuff. So there was no financial downside to it. And then anyone who's ever been on an expat assignment knows that it's also an opportunity to accumulate wealth. So there was no downside to that per se. However, knowing what I know now, I would have negotiated that. I would have said, listen, I'm willing to go, but we need to make the job scope bigger, or we need to do something different so that it wouldn't be a development assignment, right? And the second thing that happened while I was over there, so when I originally took that assignment in Singapore, it was to be the head of HR for Asia Pacific. And about 9 months in, we had a reorg, which we were notorious for doing. And in that reorg, we inherited Africa, Middle East, Russia, and the CIS countries, right? And so that was a scope growth. Now, at the time, I was the head of HR, so I made sure that all of my peers had a job evaluation process done to look at their jobs and to have them evaluated based on the new scope. And in many cases, it actually increased the level of the job. And in my mind, I was like, clearly, my boss is going to also then suggest that my job be reevaluated, right? And he was a wonderful man. He was a great sponsor, one of the best leaders I've ever worked for, but he was not perfect. He had a blind spot, and that was a blind spot. He didn't advocate or ask, well, Latasha, should your job be reevaluated? And at the time, my thinking was, it feels self-serving to ask for my job to be reevaluated, right? Like, I didn't really want to do that. And so when I think back on that, absolutely, I should have done that. I should have been my biggest advocate. Not that I was asking for more than I was entitled to, not that I was asking for something that was unreasonable, but learning how to hone your own voice, even when you're worried about the perception of it being a self-serving request.
Yeah.
Now, ultimately for me, it was actually a good thing, because that was actually one of the set of circumstances that actually helped me make the decision to move on.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. And it really resonates, right? A lot of times people don't feel like they need to advocate for themselves. They don't feel like they need to step in, especially if you get people of color and women and people that aren't used to just advocating on their own behalves. I don't know how what you learned coming up, right? My parents used to always tell me, well, don't toot your own horn.
Yeah.
But else will do that for you.
Yeah. And that's what you think. And a lot of us came up in the generation of put your head down, do the work. And it's funny because I actually had this conversation with the CEO when I left. And I said, because he, and that was the thing, like people were so surprised when I switched companies. I had been there 20 years, had moved, 5 times with the company, including the international move, was on a texting basis with the outgoing CEO and the incoming, right? So like, why would you leave, when you have that kind of, establishment? And I told the CEO the incoming one, who I think very highly of, I said, for 20 years, I've lived by the motto of put your head down and work. Put your head down and work, and people will see the fruits of your labor. People will see the good work that you do, right? And I gave him 3 very specific examples of when I did that and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so at that point, it was my responsibility to take my career in my own hands and make decisions that were best for me. No one else is, and I think people need to understand this. Corporations are made up of wonderful, good people. Yeah. But corporations have to do what's in the best interest of corporations, which means you as an individual need to do what's in the best interest of you.
Yeah, no. And it's easy to become the identity of the corporation, and that said, I mean, that's a great segue into one of the things that you're doing things at scale. Amazon does things at scale. So I have 2 parts of this question. One is, what are some of the things that you're doing at Amazon that are impacting the company's DEI success? And how does that play into your personal journey, right? If we think back to the connection of how do you make sure what you're doing is going to benefit in your career as well?
Yeah, I've seen really smart, talented DEI professionals who come in with what I call a playbook. So this is how I've done it at company A, this is how I've done it at company B, this is how I've done it in my personal company, and now I want to implement it in your organization. And that rarely ever works. And the reason why it doesn't work is because it does not feel organic to how the organization does business. I tell people, if you're going to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, you have to make it sticky. You have to make it so sticky that it feels organic to how the organization runs on all other key aspects or KPIs. So when I was at Caterpillar and we were doing diversity work, it was very clear to me that a lot of these very technical engineers, they knew how to measure certain things, but they couldn't quite measure inclusion. It was too fuzzy, right? I don't really know what to do with this. But one thing that was really important to Caterpillar was safety. So if you asked the janitor all the way up to the CEO, what's the one most important thing that we must do? They will all say safety. We started every meeting with a safety briefing. I mean, in the office, not in the plant, in the office. Every meeting started with the safety briefing. So everybody knew safety was our key priority. So when we relaunched the diversity and inclusion strategy, it was all around emotional safety, right? And so at Amazon, there is nothing more important to us than customer obsession. We lie and say all 14 leadership principles are equal, but we all know customer obsession actually it is a higher priority than the other 13, although they're close behind. But customer obsession roots everything that we do. We really work hard to earn and keep customer trust, and we're always kind of trying to figure out how do we delight the customer in new ways. It's the reason we move heaven and earth to try to get your package to you in 2 days, right? And so at Amazon, when I came into this role, or actually my previous role leading the corporate strategy, was all around, are we asking ourselves the question, are we equitably obsessing over all customers? Wow. So when you're building a product and thinking about customer obsession, who are you even envisioning is your customer? Yeah. Is it a person in a four-story walk-up in Brooklyn? Is it a person with disabilities? Is it a queer Latinx man? Who are you thinking of as your customer when you're building your products and services? And so our whole DEI strategy is around customer obsession. And I think how that's played into my own personal journey is the work that I'm doing right now, which is really around in studios, which is all customer facing work. So how do we make sure that we have diverse representation in front of the camera, behind the camera, above the line, below the line? How do we make sure that we're telling fully nuanced, authentic stories that are not riddled with stereotypes and tropes, and then how do we do it in an equitable way that increases access for storytellers to be able to tell their stories with agency? And how do we tell those stories to a globally diverse audience? And so, in our generation, Cody, I'm assuming we're probably close in the same age, I don't know. But we watched everything that had a Black person on TV because it was so rare.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it was good or bad, we watched it.
Yeah.
And so what the work that I'm doing now and the work that I want to do is bring customers stories that reflect, all parts of them, that reflect the beautifulness of who they are. I don't want to tell trauma porn or narco porn. I want to tell the stories that no one else is telling. I want to tell the stories of Sylvie's love, of, during the civil rights movement, there was a lot of things happening, but guess what? Black people were also falling in love, having children, getting married, and all the things, right? Yeah. And let people see that. We were breaking ceilings in careers. We were doing all of that. Just like today, we're in another civil rights movement and we're still doing all the things, to be able to tell those stories in a rich and authentic way. And, that's rewarding for me when I can bring people delight and then also change minds, because I really believe storytelling changes how people see themselves and how they see other people.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And stories are so powerful. And we all do have stories, right? We all have the stories that we want to tell. And companies are getting better and better at kind of recognizing when there might be an event, but it doesn't have to be event driven all the time. And I'm glad to see the work that you're doing with Amazon Studios, and because what people see and what they hear about is going to really make a difference. And it's really impressive that you've got those. Now, I know that you're a big champion of women's events, and we just this month we're celebrating Women's History Month, and then a few weeks ago was International Women's Day. Yes. What were some of the key learnings and takeaways from International Women's Day that you could share with the group?
It was interesting because I think, when we stopped or when we paused on International Women's Day to just, recognize all of the achievements of women globally and the great work that we're doing, it was also a reminder that we were less than a year away from the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. We were a year off of the Me Too movement and all of those things where we promised as a collective society to do better. And yet we found ourselves in this place with, anti-Asian racism rampant. We find ourselves with Black women in tech, literally catching hell and telling their stories of their experiences. We're finding that people holding, some of the highest offices in politics are still perpetuating an atmosphere of, sexual harassment or intimidation. It's like, but we just said we were going to do better. We just said that we were on a new path, and in a way it was frustrating and it was disheartening. But it reminds me that we can't only do the performative things. I know everybody wants their leaders, their CEOs, and their companies to make a statement, and they should. I know everyone, says, I have a guy on my team who always says, open up your purse, right? So make a donation, right? So fund the things you care about, and we should. But if we do those things without examining the outcomes of our processes, and I don't care what field you're in and what you do, if you are not examining the outcomes of your processes to see if they're producing equitable outcomes, and then if you realize that they're not, be willing to throw them away and start over, then we'll never move forward. And I don't care if your process is making television and film, if it's creating technology, if it's law enforcement, if you are a teacher, whatever field you're in, how are you measuring the outcomes, and then being willing to say, this is no longer working. It's not giving me equitable outcomes. I have to scrap it and start all over.
Yeah, no, that is so true. And if you think about what everyone's dealing with right now, so many people are in in transition, and they're dealing with disruptions in their world,
Yeah.
like nothing we've ever seen, right? What advice do you have to people who are, I mean, they're tired, right? Leaders don't want to lead when they get tired. People doing the work every day, they just don't want to engage anymore. And they're just trying to make sense out of this environment. Any advice you have there?
Listen, Cody, I believe in Jesus and therapy, okay?
That's right.
And so more now than ever, we have to be diligent about protecting our mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we have to treat it like, you know, if you broke your leg, what would you do? Right? You go to the doctor, you follow. And I think we need to have that same mindset and mentality, and first remove the stigma around mental health resources and normalize that more. And I think especially when you layer on, you know, a pandemic on top of everything else.
Right.
Right. So a dual pandemic, a pandemic of racism, a pandemic of COVID-19, all of the things, economic struggles, that all of that is a lot. And so we have to be mindful of protecting our own mental health wellness. And we also have to make sure we recognize when we see others struggling.
Yeah.
We need to be listening to people. My neighbor, this morning, my neighbor was just telling me about a fellow principal who committed suicide just recently.
Wow.
Right. And my heart was broken. Right. So how are we listening to people and becoming acutely aware and providing support? And it's really important. You're going to hear me say this probably more than once, but like, organizations need to proactively provide that support. When you're in a marginalized community, or when you're in those kinds of states where your mental well-being is in jeopardy, it's hard to ask for help. Sometimes you don't even know how to ask for help. And so when organizations proactively provide the kind of environment and resources and constantly make people aware of those, it takes one less burden off of the person.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't even know how to ask for help, to your point, and even lean into it. I'm like you, I lean into my faith for sure. One of the things that brings to mind is, you know, I've heard I've watched your videos, and you've talked about being bold and being brave over the years. Can you talk a little bit about what does that mean to you, and you know, and how might other people be able to embrace that theme and have an impact?
You know, it's something that I've actually only gotten better at in my later years. I wish I could go back and tell my 20-year-old self, right, to be bold and brave earlier and sooner. And I think what people don't realize or don't know is that bravery doesn't mean absence of fear. It's actually the opposite. It is doing the hard thing and the right thing despite your fear. You know, bravery is in the space where you are the, you know, onlyest, which is a term that Nilafit Merchant coined, that talks about when you're the only person, right, in any environment that, you know, looks like you or has your lived experience, right? That sometimes that can be a lonely place, but bravery in those situations means acknowledging that you are the only one in that space that has the expertise to speak on your lived experience. You know, if I'm the only Black woman in a room, I dare somebody else to tell me how Black women feel.
Wow.
Right. So, and that's another form of bravery, learning how to skillfully challenge. You know, I have learned this question that I love to ask people when people are trying to tell me about me. I love to ask them, so tell me, what lived experience do you have to come to that conclusion?
Wow. Wow.
Or when men want to tell me, you know what women find attractive in terms of, you know, movies or television or consumer products, whatever it is, I just want to know. So what lived experience are you using to come to that conclusion?
Yeah, that's powerful. That is really powerful. You know, a lot of times when I find someone's resisting me on something, I realize that it's because I created this acronym called FEIBLE, right? It's FEIBLE. And it says they're resisting me because probably there's some kind of fear that they have, some ego involved that they've got, probably some insecurity is the I, and the B is their beliefs, but then the L and the E is that lived experience that you talked about.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're going on based off of.
Yeah. But bravery is also the hard work of self-awareness. You know, I can remember early in my career where I was actually miserable. It's actually in my finance days. And like, I love the people I work with, but did not have a passion for the work. But it was one of those situations where it was like, you're the only African-American woman in a management position, company-wide, worldwide in the company at the time. And like, do you get out? If you get out, they won't hire another one. Like, there was this weight this artificial weight I had put on my own shoulders, right? And so, and as a result of it, like, even though I thought I was doing a good job of masking it, I wasn't, not at all, not at all, right? And so, for me in that moment, in that time of my life, bravery was doing the hard work of saying, what's the common denominator here? Oh, it's you.
Yeah.
So you need to get you together. Because the other thing I realized that, even as I was getting ready to look for something else outside of finance, and I had the support of my boss and who was really helping me and championing me in this, like things weren't happening for me and I couldn't figure out why, right? And it was because God couldn't bless me with greater if I hadn't been faithful over what I was currently doing. So I had to get me together. I had to change my attitude. I had to work unto that thing like it was the thing I always wanted to do. And it wasn't until I could really do the work on me, the doors began to open.
Yeah.
And I think so sometimes bravery is actually doing the hard work on you.
Well, we promised our audience that you were going to be candid, and I'm really excited to see that is true. And so with, that said, as a Black woman, where did you find your mentorship, your sponsors, the guidance that moved you along on your journey?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is like knowing the difference between mentor sponsors and how you use them in your journey. So I think that's key. But like my biggest champion from the time I was young, the person who like put this fire in me was my father. He was very clear in letting me know my voice mattered. And he was also very clear about the fact that I needed to have a voice, as oftentimes the only little Black girl in my class for years, right? And so, and I think back to that, I think I shared this with you a while back about the story when I was in high school that I transferred high schools and went from a regular high school to a more affluent high school. And in the new high school, they had put me in all of these like regular basic classes. And I kept saying, no, I was on an AP track. And they were like, don't worry about it. It's fine. This will be better for you. And I'm like, no, it won't. And day after day, I would go to my counselor's office to try to get him to change my schedule. And he would just send me back to class. And that last day I went in the office and I sat and I was like, I'm not leaving until you call my old high school.
Wow.
So I sit in this office and miss every class until you call my old high school and verify my schedule. And they did. And then they had to redo my whole schedule to put me back where I was. But I think about that, like if my father hadn't been the kind of father he was, that could have changed the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It could have changed the rest of my life. And, so I think he's been my biggest advocate in terms of, and mentor, brilliant man. But also I have to tell you, Black women have been my saving grace in every industry. I love sometimes when we get together because, sometimes the unicorns have to get together to remind ourselves that we aren't unicorns.
Yeah.
And I love how Black women, particularly in the entertainment industry, have embraced me, have extended their networks to me, have just really been supportive. And, that's really key. So I tell people all the time, your mentors are the people you can tell you're the good, the bad, and the ugly to. Your sponsors are the people that are carrying your paper in the room. So you might not even always know who your sponsor is, but if someone you think is a sponsor, then you have to think about what messages do I want this person to always be saying about me?
Yeah.
And then how do you make sure that every time you interact with that person, you're reinforcing those messages by how you deliver to them, how you work with them, whatever, right? And so that when they're in that room, they can say, you know, every time I've interacted with Cody, like he has been really innovative in terms of finding solutions to customer problems. Or every time I have interacted with Cody and asked his opinion on something, I find it really refreshing that he can be candid and really give hard feedback, right? So whatever it is you want that person to say about you in the room, how are you demonstrating that every time you interact with them?
Yeah, and it's great that you made that distinction between what are those mentors, what are those sponsors. Can you go a little bit more in maybe how somebody could really benefit? Because sometimes people say, "Hey, I want a mentor," but they haven't figured out how to make that relationship the most beneficial. Any thoughts on how they make that a beneficial relationship?
Yeah, and I tell people to be careful. I get a lot of people who ask me if I will mentor them, and most I turn down. And part of the reason why I turn down, because I think a mentor has to be in a position to like see you in action. Because a mentor should be somebody that's giving you active feedback, right? And so I have a couple situations where I mentor people who I don't work with or not in the same industry, but they are also people that I have learned that every time we talk, they're coming with specific examples of here's the situation, here's how I'm thinking about it. I would love your feedback and input, right? And so, and I've also seen them in other places. I've seen how they move. And so I think that's really important because some people think they want a mentor and they really don't. Because like I said, a mentor is somebody that's going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you're not prepared for that and what you're really looking for is a sponsor, then don't ask for a mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my best mentor relationships have been people that I have watched and been like, I don't know who he or she is, but like, I want to invest in them. There was a young lady who, when I first got to Amazon, young woman in her 20s, fairly, new to the company or right out of college. But every time she showed up in a meeting I was in, she fearlessly spoke truth to power that was backed up with actual data and wisdom. You could tell she wasn't just shooting off her hip. She had done the work. She had done the research. And she did it in a very, skillful way, right? She didn't come in there throwing darts at people, but was brilliant. And I was like, who is this? I call her a little girl playfully. She allows me to call her that, so that's not meant to be derogatory. I just want to point that out. But I was like, who is this little girl? Yeah. And I was like, I want to know her. And so, I set up coffee for us to meet. And I was like, I want to get to know you. What do you want to do? What's your career plans and goals? And we talked through those things. And at one point in time, she even came to work for me. But it's funny because we still have a close relationship today. And I tell people, it's really a two-way mentorship. I think I learn as much from her as she does from me.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And I think those of us who are over 40 really need to be listening to those who are under 30.
Yeah.
And, listen, I understand how, initially sometimes we can be dismissive and say, they just need to live a little longer and then they'll understand. But actually, that may be partially true. But the other part of that is, no, maybe we should be less patient and listen to them.
Yeah, I agree. I've learned so much just for my own kids, that things that I didn't have my eyes open to and I wouldn't know because I wasn't aware of it. And it's made a huge impact in just my ability to understand more. And so that's really a powerful point that you're making. One of the things that I think people always try to figure out, what can I do next? One of the questions that I had for you is, what do you think is one of the most impactful thing women can do to accelerate their career success? You hear about, oh, you got to have work-life balance, you got to have this, and you want to have a career specifically for women. What are some things that they can do to accelerate their career given that backdrop?
3 things. The first one is know your worth and value. So I tell people all the time, if a headhunter calls you, you should take the call. I didn't say take the job, but you should take the call. Like, take the call because you need to know you have options. So many times people stay in a situation too long, a marriage, a relationship, a job, a city, or whatever, because they're comfortable in dysfunction and they feel like they don't have any other options or alternatives. You need to know your worth and value so that you are always consciously making a choice to stay somewhere or to actively go somewhere. So that's number one. Number two, know the reasons why you do the work that you do. What are the things that motivate you? And it's okay if money is one of them, but what else? What are the reasons that get you out of bed to do the work that you do? And always be chasing somewhere that's going to let you align your values with your work, right? Yeah. And then number three is, I would say, name the boogeyman.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
So I think that one day I was like, why are, people of color and women of color more acutely, more risk averse? And the question was born out of my own risk aversion. So, the joke that a lot of people don't know is every time you see me, my hair looks different, and it's a mechanism I use to make myself comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, because naturally I'm more risk averse than you would think. And so I do little things to just get me in the habit of breaking out of a habit, right? I probably eat the same thing for lunch 5 times a week. I'm no joke. So you have to find little ways to make you take more risks. So I think people of color and women, and again, so women of color acutely, are very keenly aware of the sacrifices people who came before us made. And so there's this responsibility we have, like I was telling you in my finance days, that we bear this responsibility, sometimes self-imposed, that we cannot let the ancestors down, those who have paid, sacrificed and paved the way for us to sit in these seats. We can't let them down, right? Yeah. So we don't want to fail. And then, we understand that we're still breaking new barriers. So we're trying not to get the door closed on those coming behind us. So we don't want to rock the boat too much. And as a result, we tend to play it too safe. Right. And sometimes we don't even know what we're playing it safe from. We are fearful of something that we have not even named, and we've given it a power that it doesn't even deserve. Right. And so I remember sitting in a conference probably 15 years ago, and there was 2 white women on stage. And one of them I knew, she was a partner at Ernst & Young, and the other one was a woman who worked in the NBA at the time, in one of the executive offices. And I'm listening to them talk, about how, if the organization doesn't value me, then I'll leave and go somewhere else. Now, I was sitting there having cognitive dissonance, Cody, because one of the woman at Ernst & Young, I knew her very well, and I knew that her husband was a stay-at-home dad. And so she was the only breadwinner, not primary, only. Wow. Right? Yeah. And similar, so my husband was a 20-year elementary school teacher. Noble profession, but not very lucrative, right? Yeah. And I have moved this man around the world 7 times currently, probably at the time 4 or 5 times. Picked up his career and followed me to support my career. My children have picked up their lives, and started over in all these different places. And so I had this responsibility that, like, I can't let all of that be in vain, right? They have all sacrificed too much for me to let this be in vain. So when she said, I'll just leave and go somewhere else, I was like, what do you mean? Like, I can't do that. All these people have rerouted their lives for me, and I know you're in a similar situation. So how do you say that? Right. And it dawned on me, like, why aren't the women who look like me that I'm talking to thinking this way? And it's because we have given this boogeyman too much power. And so I started asking myself, if I rock the boat, if I say the hard thing, if I do the thing that I know is right, but could have not be received well because it's a challenge to others who are not normally accustomed to being challenged, what's the worst thing that could happen? Yeah. No, that is a great point. And I think these are some amazing points that are going to help individuals with what they're trying to do. Let me take the big, kind of the 800-pound gorilla out of the bag. And what should the leaders do to help their teams increase their career success? Yeah, I think leaders in the organization have to constantly measure their processes for equitable outcomes. And if not, you have to be willing to throw them away, right? I think leaders also have to be good allies. They have to use their time, their power, whether it's their positional power or their influence, their body in terms of what are they reading, who are they listening to, and their resources to combat racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, or anything else that is keeping your people from progressing. Like, you have to actively be doing the work to make your organization more equitable for everyone.
Yeah, that's powerful. We're gonna get to some questions. I see some questions in the chat. I just want to see any final thoughts on what people who are on that leadership path can do to take that next step before we jump in and get a few of these questions.
The last point I wanted to make about the boogeyman is, you got to understand, when I say what's the worst thing that could happen, is the worst thing that could happen is you might lose a job, right? But that's not going to stop your family from loving you. That's not going to stop your friends from talking to you. That's not going to stop you from being, a bad chick or an amazing man. It's not going to stop who you are. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's really important to say, what is the worst thing that can happen? Because it just means you do go get another job. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's a great point. Life is too short, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So, all right. So we have a few questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Let's see. So let me grab one of these questions. So we got a question from Jackie. It says, who do you look up to for inspiration or mentorship? That's a great question.
Yeah. So actually quite a few people. I'm really encouraged by some of the Black women now who are just, again, continuing to break new ground and barriers. Tashonda Duckett, now new CEO of TIAA, and Rosalind Brewer, now CEO of Walgreens. I'm really excited and proud about the barriers that they continue to break, but also I'm very mindful about uplifting them and praying for them, because I know it's hard doing what they do. And I think a lot of people think, oh, when I get to that seat, things will be better. Oh, when I get to that seat, I can do more, or I'll have less obstacles. And the answer is no, you won't. It's just a different set of obstacles and barriers. And so you got to learn how to be content and how to be solution oriented in the seat you're in, because those challenges don't go away.
No, that's a great point. So here we have another question. Oh, this is a good one. What is one decision you wish you didn't make?
I wish I didn't wait so long to start taking more risks. I wish that that I knew my worth and that I named the boogeyman earlier. I tell people all the time, don't get me wrong, because I had a wonderful career at Caterpillar, and again, have been on 6 of the 7 continents in the world, not in Antarctica, and don't plan on it, but and had a great life. But I had to leave Caterpillar to know I knew how to leave. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you can stay somewhere so long that you don't even know how to leave.
Yeah. Totally get it.
Yeah.
Totally get it. And we see it all the time as well. I see it on the recruiting side quite a bit.
Yeah.
Here's a question. It says, what are the most important attributes of successful leaders today?
I think that's individually defined. So for me, for me, it's a couple things. Everything is attached to a story, so why not?
Yeah, why not?
So there was a point where I was like, you know what? I should think about doing something, thinking about whether or not I wanted to, I'm not going to say what company or what job I was doing when this happened, but I was thinking about making a career shift, and just out of frustration. And that's another thing. Never run from something, only run to something. Because when you run from something, listen, when you run from something, it greets you in the next place.
Yes.
At the old place, the something name was Stephanie, and the new place, her name is Jill. But the same situation shows up. So never run from something, always run to something. But for me, it was really asking myself in terms of success, like, do I feel like I have the ability to make a difference? Do I feel like, and the phrase I always use is, can I scratch out a little corner of the world and make it better for a few other people? Yeah. And for me, that's what success looks like.
No, that's great. Hey, I see a great question in here from Eddie. Shout out to Eddie. What was the best conversation you had regarding ID&E with a movie star?
Oh, I'm having some amazing ones right now. We're in the process of rolling out a new inclusion policy, which I'm super excited about. And, you know, to be able to talk to people who are doing this work, and who are, you know, mega stars, and are like, thank you. Usually we're the ones asking the studio to do better. And I appreciate the studio coming to us and asking us to do better, right? Because it's going to take us collectively to uplift this industry. And so, you know, part of the reason why, you know, I get to do this work is so that we can create an ecosystem for talent where they can make room at the table for other people. You know, so when I get to sit down with people like, you know, Lena Waithe or Michael B. Jordan or Viola Davis and Daniel Day Kim and Nnamdi Asomugha, and talk about, listen, the whole point of you being here is so that you can make room at the table for other talent that you know that should be producers and directors and writers, right? So if you get this deal with Amazon and you don't impact the industry in any meaningful way, then that's a fail on us. If every time we shoot a television series or a movie and we don't leave that community better than we found it, that's a fail for us. Like, we have this incredible opportunity to really drive meaningful change. Let's do it. And so those are the most fun conversations, and I'm really grateful because I think, you know, listen, I haven't been in the entertainment business a long time, so I won't pretend to know how everybody else works. But with the talent that I do talk to, they all have been like, wow, this is different. Like, we don't normally see this at a studio. We don't normally have these kind of conversations with the studio. And we've never seen a DEI team work like yours. So, which I take as a compliment. But, you know, like, listen, I'm over halfway done with my life. If I cannot make an impact, then what am I doing?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great, I mean, even just some of the conversation you and I had, you know, before we got started, it that came through loud and clear. One of the questions, we got one more question here that we'll take. I know I want to be respectful of your time. And this question is, you know, how do you keep your team motivated despite conflict and obstacles?
Yeah. So it's funny because just a couple of weeks ago, I had, as we were preparing for, you know, the cycle of, you know, new goals for the year, performance feedback, all of that kind of things, I required each of my team members to come to the conversation with their 3 reasons. What are your 3 reasons for doing this work? Because, you know, those of us who do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we know that you don't get into this work because, you know, you have a passion for it, or you have a passion for people. This work is about research. It's about numbers. It's about education. It's about changing systems. It's about building mechanisms. Like, if you only got in this because you wanted to do unconscious bias training, go find another line of work, because that won't change. People have been doing that for 30 plus years and the world still looks like it looks. Yeah. So I had my team come with their 3 reasons. What are your 3 reasons for doing this work? Like, why do you get up every day and do this work? Because you need to know. So the days when it gets hard and it's kicking your behind, why am I doing this work? And the other thing is, a lot of people who do this work also wear marginalized identities, right? Yeah. So you find more people of color, more women, more LGBTQ, more people with disabilities who are naturally drawn to this work. And so you are living this personally, and you're doing it in your day job. So you particularly have to know your 3 whys. Otherwise, sometimes it gets to be too much. So that's what I always remind my team, this is your why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've been involved in this for a long time. I want to ask you this last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Is you see a lot of energy from all the things that have happened over the past year. There seems to be some renewed vigor in moving this forward. What's your take on kind of how it's going to keep moving forward, or are we going to see the stall that we've seen before if you've been around this for any period of time?
It depends on if we keep letting people off the hook. So, I know a lot of people are, over cancel culture, right? They're like, we've just become too cancel culture. And I do think cancel culture can go too far. But I do think people should stop and ask the question, how did or why did cancel culture come into an existence? And it really was because we lacked cultures of accountability. Right? So when people couldn't take accountability for their own actions, when people couldn't make atonement and make corrections to their own behavior, to their own systems and processes, right? Then people held them accountable by canceling them. Then if you can't get there on your own, fine.
Yeah.
We'll go elsewhere. And so I think there's some value in looking at, why people have resulted to cancel culture and what are you willing to do? And so, I know one thing, that in addition to the work that we all are doing, I think this is also a moment in time where, white people have to be talking to white people, yeah. Right? So I think there's, straight people have to be talking to straight people. Able-bodied people have to be talking to able-bodied people. Like those of us who wear any form of privilege, have to be willing to concede power in order to make space and equitable reparations for those who have lacked it.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful point. It's a powerful point you've made. I think you brought up some phenomenal points and shared some amazing information for everyone on here. I think there's something to take away and this has been a fantastic conversation. I don't know if you have any last parting words for our guests.
Listen, I'm just appreciative of the conversation and the fact that people would tune in and watch and ask questions. And Cody, I appreciate you for all the work you're doing in this space. And really honored to be among the thought leaders that you have brought to the table. And so thank you for having me, for inviting me.
I am thrilled and gracious that you agreed to join us. You've done some amazing stuff. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing some of the great things you're going to continue to do at scale for Amazon. So we appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.